Let's pray. God of life, we give you thanks for your love for us and for the faith that draws us together in this place and which is nurtured here. We ask that you would be present in our conversation, in the things that we learn and the things that we share, and help us to grow nearer to each other and to you. In Christ we pray.
Amen. So I wanted to begin this morning. I shared this story with my friends in Koinonia, but how I got here this morning. So on December 11th, during the giving of our offerings and gifts, on my gift of self card, I wrote, today and in the coming week, I offer to God my gift of yes. Yes. And so it's like, it was me. It was like, okay, so you call on me this week, God, just let me say yes. So Monday evening was our deacons meeting, and we were having a Christmas party deacons meeting, and we were having it at Bree Ivy's house. And I had my coat on, I was ready to walk out the door, and I knew the street she lived on, but I needed to look up her house number. So I opened my iPad to get the email with the address information, and there's a text message from Ann Smith. Can you go to the budget summit meeting? Lynn Wallaber, who is our session liaison from the worship and music committee, just texted me she can't go. And I texted Ann back. I said, I'm sorry, Ann, I have my coat on. I'm on my way out to Deacon's meeting. She said, well, could you skip the Deacon's meeting and go to the budget summit because she only has 101 temperature and I really don't want to leave her. I said, well, is Brian going? Maybe Brian could represent the worship and music. Well, he goes, but it really should be somebody other than Brian. So what about Gordon Mitchell? He's the treasurer. Not in session, but maybe he's going to the budget summit. He can represent worship. And I said, I'm going to try and contact Gordon and see if he's going. So we did a lot of back and forth. Finally, Ann texted me and she said, I just texted Phil Engel, and we didn't really have anything to defend in our budget because God bless Ann, she cut it by a couple $1,000s. So we didn't have to defend anything. So none of us wound up going to the budget summit. And I'm in the car on the way to Deacon's and I'm thinking, oh my God. My gift of self was yes, and I just said no. Oh, I said, forgive me, God. I will try. I promise I'll try to do better. Tuesday morning, the phone rings. Rick Jacobs, calling on behalf of the Adult Ed Committee. And based on some things you've shared, we wondered if you would come and lead a discussion and share with us a little bit about your work in the field of addiction. And I said, boy, Rick taught me at a good time. Last night I said no, and I'm saying yes. So that's how we got here. So I wanted to share with you, those of you who know me know I'm a huge Richard Rohr fan. So I have a few readings from Richard Rohr. They're going to speak to my soul's journey and how I got into working in the field of addiction and recovery. And as you listen to these, you're going to hear Brian's sermons in the last 3 weeks in here. But this first one is Richard talking about suffering and the purpose of suffering. We always ask why. Why do we have to suffer? Does God want us to suffer? And Richard has actually written a book called Order, Disorder, Reorder. It says, first the fall and then the recovery from the fall. Both are the mercy of God. And that's a quote from Julian of Norwich. Whenever we're led out of normalcy into sacred open space, it's going to feel like suffering because it is letting go of what we're used to. This is always painful at some level, but part of us has to die if we are ever to grow larger. That's from John. If we're not willing to let go and die to our small false self, we won't enter into any new or sacred space. I see transformation and change occurring in 3 stages: order, disorder, and reorder. And he talks about the stage of order being the container. So it's like, when we as our formative years, we're developing our belief systems, and usually it involves what we learn from family members, what we learn from church, what we learn in school, and we're building that container. But then comes along disorder, and it's the things that happen in our life that throw us off kilter. And some of them are, milder disruptions, and some of them are huge disruptions. But then he says, only in the final reorder stage can darkness and light coexist. Can paradox be okay? We are finally at home in the only world that ever existed. This is true and contemplative knowing. Here, death is part of life, failure is part of victory, and imperfection is included in perfection. Opposites collide and unite, and everything belongs. We dare not get rid of our pain before we have learned what it has to teach us. So we must resist the instant fix and acknowledge ourselves as beginners to be open to true transformation. In the great spiritual traditions, the wounds to our ego are our teachers and are to be welcomed. They should be paid attention to, not denied or even perfectly resolved. The resurrected Christ is the icon of reorder. Once we can learn to live in this third spacious place, neither fighting nor fleeing reality, but holding the creative tension, we are in the spacious place of grace out of which all newness comes. God is now in charge, not us. There's no direct flight from order to reorder. You must go through disorder, which is surely why Jesus dramatically and shockingly endured it on the cross. He knew we would all want to deny necessary suffering unless he made it overwhelmingly clear. So this second one has to do with how do we experience the presence of God, and how do we know and receive guidance from divine guidance. This is called We Are Being Guided. What will happen if I truly trust God's love for me and allow God to direct my life? That's a quote from Ilia Delia, who was a Franciscan nun. This week's meditations focus on how we discern what actions are ours to do. We always wrestle with this in Koinonia and deacons. What should we be doing? As Francis of Assisi said on his deathbed, I have done what is mine. May Christ teach you what is yours. Father Richard teaches that discernment begins with an authentic trust in God's presence and guidance. The full life of faith becomes a life of deep joy and rest. We don't have to be, when we are fully grafted to the vine, to use Jesus' words, we don't have to be anxious about many things. We don't have to be worried about the next moment or about tomorrow. We can trust that we are being guided. In fact, almost everything is seen as guidance. Our ability to trust that there is guidance available allows it to become guidance. Basically, we switch from the fixing, fully understanding, and controlling mode to the trusting, listening, and allowing mode. Then we start allowing the divine flow instead of stopping it with a no or a question. The spirit in us knows how to use everything that happens to bring about healing and growth. We can trust that God is even in this. That does not mean we shouldn't work to change and improve things. In fact, quite the contrary. But when our first heart and soul response is a yes and not a no, then we can experience God in the moment and see guidance in the events of our lives. We can trust that nothing is wasted. If there are changes and fixes that have to be made, we can now take care of them in an appropriate, calm, and positive way. That is what characterizes a mature believer in any religion. Faith, as we see in the Hebrew scriptures and Jesus' usage of them, is much closer to our words trust or confidence than it is about believing doctrines to be true. Simply believing doctrines demands almost no ego surrender or real change of the small self. Holding confidence that God is good, God can be trusted, and God is actively involved in my life is a much more powerful and effective practice. This is the practical power of biblical faith. Faith-filled people are, quite simply, usable for larger purposes because they live in and listen to a much larger self. Richard shares that his contemplative practice helps us grow a trusting faith. He says, from my own experience, I know I need a contemplative practice. Some form of the prayer of quiet is necessary to touch me at the unconscious level, the level where deep and lasting transformation occurs. From my place of prayer, I am able to understand more clearly what is mine to do and to have the courage to do it. And then this last one is a call to awakening. So last week we talked about being called, and everyone is called. It's not meant for just certain few people, special people. So this is a call to awakening. Richard reflects on what it means to respond to God's call of love and justice for the common good. What then does it mean to follow Jesus? History is continually graced with the people who somehow learned to act beyond and outside their self-interest and for the good of the world. People who clearly operated by a power larger than their own. Consider Gandhi, Oscar Schindler, Martin Luther King Jr. Add to them Rosa Parks, Mother Teresa, Dorothy Day, Oscar Romero, Cesar Chavez, and many unsung leaders. Their inspiring witness offers us strong evidence that the mind of Christ still inhabits the world. Most of us are fortunate to have crossed paths with many lesser known persons who exhibit the same presence. I can't say how one becomes such a person. All I can presume is that they were all called. They all had their Christ moments in which they stopped denying their own shadows, stopped projecting those shadows elsewhere, and agreed to their own deepest identity and solidarity with the world. Following Jesus is a vocation to share the fate of God for the light of the world. Often, this has little to do with believing the right things about God, beyond the fact that God is love itself. Those who respond to the call and agree to carry and love what God loves, which is both the good and the bad, and to pay the price for its reconciliation within themselves, these are the followers of Jesus Christ. They are the leaven, the salt, the remnant, the mustard seed that God uses to transform the world. The cross then is a very dramatic image of what it takes to be usable for God. It does not mean they're going to heaven and others are not. Rather, it means they have entered into heaven much earlier and thus can see things in transcendent, whole, and a healing way now. Saints are those who wake up while in this world instead of waiting for the next one. Francis of Assisi, William Wilberforce, Therese of Lisieux, Harriet Tubman didn't feel superior to anyone else. They just knew that they had been let in on a big divine secret, and they wanted to do their part in revealing it. God is calling everyone and everything, not just a few chosen ones, to God's self. To get everyone and everything there, God first needs models and images who are willing to be conformed to the body of his death and transformed into the body of his resurrection. These are the new creation, and their transformed state is still seeping into history, ever so slowly transforming it into life and life more abundantly. And there are scripture quotes in there. So I'm a huge Richard Rohr fan. And as I read those, and I'm listening to Brian's sermons over the last 3 weeks, it's like, okay, Brian, why don't you do this presentation? Because you just stole my life. So let me start at the beginning. How I got to be an addictions counselor started way back. Well, I went to college the first time. I waited a year after high school before I went to college. And the first time I went to Mount Mercy, which my junior year became Carlow College. I was a music education major. And I went through, it was like my third year of a 5-year program. And all my peers were signing up to do their student teaching. And I could not sign up for student teaching because I had procrastinated about taking a speech class. I cut class to not get up and do a presentation in front of the class. I would take a failing grade for presentation. The only thing that got me good grades were writing papers. I would get A++ on my papers. I could not get up in front of people and speak. And here I am today. So I actually, the money ran out. I ran out of money. And so I used that as an excuse to drop out of college. But I knew in the back of my mind, I can't get up there and speak in front of a group. I also had a French class that was the only incomplete class of French literature because I couldn't translate French literature. So I couldn't read, Hugo in French. So, that was not my gift. So, I got married. I had 2 wonderful kids, and for a long time, I was a stay-at-home mom. And while I was a stay-at-home mom, I got involved in volunteer work in the PTA and in the Girl Scouts. So in the Girl Scouts, Teresa was in Girl Scouts beginning in 1st grade, and in 3rd grade, her leader quit. And so some of us moms got together and took over leading the Girl Scout troop. So it was me Glenna Creeves, some of you knew Glenna Creeves, and a third mom. And we did the troop from 3rd grade through 10th grade. And at the end of 10th grade, the kids have gone in different directions in sports and stuff, and so the troop kind of folded at that point. While I was doing that, I always wind up getting thrown into things that I don't know what I'm getting thrown into. So somehow I found myself to be the chairman of Upper St. Clair Girl Scouts. So once a month, we would have a meeting of all the troop leaders in Upper St. Clair, and I was the chairperson leading that. And then another thing happened that some of our leaders were friends with Girl Scout leaders in Bethel Park, and they had a summer day camp. So we got permission for our girls to go to their summer day camp as long as we got some of our volunteer moms to go with them. So we did that one summer, and at the end of the summer, at the end of the day camp, they said, well, now you've done it, now you know what to do, you're on your own. And my friends came up to me and said, you know, Beth will be the director if you'll be the site chairman. I said, site chairman, I can do that. So we have to go downtown to the Girl Scout office for 5 days of training. And the first day of training, they said, I don't know why they call this director site chairman training. It really should be called site chairman director training, because the site chairman has most of the responsibility. So it was a lot of work, and I found myself doing things I didn't know I could do. Isn't that the way God works? And so as a result of that, I did 2 years as site chairman. Then I trained another woman to be site chairman. I worked 2 years as director under her. And after 2 years working with her husband called me up and offered me a job. And at the time I was debating about, should I go back to school? Should I go to work? I had a job handed to me, and he had his own business down on the South Side, Dubin and Company. And one of the products they sold were residential garage doors. And, and we got a contract with Sears as a subcontractor to Sears to sell and install garage doors. So my boss comes up to me and said, yeah, they want us to do a sales presentation. He said, you're going to go with me. And he said, I'm going to tell them about the product, and you're going to tell them about the order process and so forth. Well, I had designed all the order forms, and I knew about how to order, and we had pages of order forms for something different for every product. And so we go the day of our presentation. It was a regional meeting, Southwestern Pennsylvania, Northeastern West Virginia, Southeastern Ohio. And I walk into this room and there's 50 men. Now, I grew up believing men were smarter than me. Not that they were smarter than all, but men were smarter than me. My dad was probably the most brilliant man I knew. My brother, who almost failed out of high school because he didn't have grades in math and he couldn't get into college, went into service. He tested highly intelligent. They put him in naval communications, and he earned 2 naval commendations for self-taught computer. He wrote two computer programs that saved the Navy billions of dollars and earned 2 naval commendations. I thought I was not that smart. So, so he said, I got to speak in front of these 50 men. Oh my, I was in the bathroom throwing up. I had a migraine headache. I was so nervous. My boss went first. Then he had me get up there. And once I started talking and I knew what I was talking about, the butterflies went out the window, and I probably talked for half an hour. So when I was done, 2 of the gentlemen walked up to me and said, you know, between you and your boss, this is the best sales presentation we've ever had. And I'm thinking, you had to scrape me off the ceiling. I was like, you know. So that was a confidence. I'm still not over my fear of public speaking. I'm shaking right now. But so from there, the next big step that happened in 1990-91, Glenn and I signed up for a series of self-improvement seminars called the Insight Seminars. It was 1, 2, and 3. And they were, the first 2 were in downtown Pittsburgh. First one was Thursday night, and then 3 12-hour days, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. There were 200 people in attendance. And most of the work we did in that workshop was large group or some small group work. And then we went to Insight 2, and it was 40 people. And I can't remember if it was 5 or 7 days long. And 12-hour days. And everything we did, and this was like deep psychological work where we had to go into our deepest fears and our shadow self and get in touch with all of that. And every exercise we did, we had to get up there one at a time and present to the other 39 people, plus the staff that was around. And again, probably the most vulnerable I've ever been probably the biggest growth spurt I ever had in my life. As a result of the Insight seminars, I met a woman there who was a therapist who specialized in career counseling. And I had started getting this urge that is there something more I should be doing? I have no idea what it is. And so I went to her for career counseling, probably every other week for maybe, I don't know, I was 4 months or 6 months. And at the end of that, I determined I wanted to get into the field of counseling. And she had me do a vision board, and I envisioned myself, doing private therapy, maybe get into private practice, one-on-one counseling with somebody. The first thing I had to do was to go back to college and get a degree. So I applied to Chatham, and I can't remember if it was right before or right after I received my acceptance letter, but I had not yet signed up for any classes. And I was applying to be a psychology major. So it was Sunday morning, I'm singing in the choir. And this came up in Deb's discussion of, do you have any special hymns or music?
Yeah, you wouldn't say it.
And I said, I'm saving it for the 29th. Start singing, Here I Am, Lord. I'm going to cry right now. And I got this tremendous feeling welling up from inside of me that God was calling me to something. I had no idea what it was, but all I knew was, yes, sign me up, I'm here. And I didn't know where it was taking me. So I wound up going to Chatham. My third year there, my advisor says, we want you to do an internship before you graduate. Go over to the student development office. Oh, before that, I started Chatham in January of 1994. In April of 1994, we discovered our son was using drugs. And really scary time of our life. And we did some precautionary things, but ultimately we wound up putting him in a treatment program at Gateway Greentree, which was a 6-week program, 3 hours a night, 3 hours, 3 nights a week for 6 weeks. And Tuesday nights were family nights. So Glenn and I participated in the family program. We had to learn about codependency and enabling behaviors so that we needed to change some of the things that we were doing if we were going to support him in getting well. So when it came time to do my internship, my advisor said, go over to the student development office, they'll hook you up with an internship. And I said, is there somebody I want to call first? And I called my son's therapist. Actually, after he finished the treatment program, his therapist was asking me to go out to parent groups and share my story. So once again, I'm speaking in front of people that I never thought I would. So I called her. Does Gateway have an internship program? Yeah, we do. I said, I heard you just opened a brand new outpatient facility in McMurray, 5 minutes from my house. Oh, yeah, we would love to have. So she put me in touch with the woman who interviewed for internships, and I got an internship. So I started there in spring semester, January 1996. And I worked with the adolescent therapist in group therapy from January through May. And at the end of May, I said to him, I feel like I'm just getting my feet wet. And I said, I'd really like to learn more. Can I stay on as a volunteer? Oh, yeah, we'd love to have you stay on as a volunteer. So after about a month of volunteering, he says to me, would you like a paid internship? I said, really, you have those? He said, well, you don't get paid a salary or an hourly. We'll give you a stipend, but it'll cover the cost of your voice. He said, if you're coming here anyway, you might as well get something. I did 2 more semesters of internship. And in those 2 semesters, the gentleman I originally interned with was promoted, and he moved to the Greentree office, and they brought in a young gal just out of grad school to be the primary adolescent therapist at Gateway South. And I interned for 2 semesters under her. She was a young gal, gorgeous. She was a model. She was a model, and she could interact with the kids kind of on their level, because she knew their music. She knew the brand of clothes they were wearing. She knew what movies they watched and what TV shows they watched. And, when it came my turn to take over, because when I would cover for her or whatever, I always felt like, are these kids going to be able to relate to me? Are they going to think I'm old enough to be their grandmother and they can get over on me? Are they going to think I don't know anything? And then I just had to go, you know what, God, You put me here. So just use me. And I never had a problem. So after I did 3 semesters of internship and I graduated, they immediately offered me a job. At the time, I was thinking I would only do part-time because I didn't have a master's degree. And I wasn't planning on getting one because we had 2 kids in college at that point. And for me to get a master's degree and work full-time, I'm a good student, but I have to work probably 4 times as hard as anybody else. So I would only be able to take 1 course at a time. It would take me forever to get through grad school. And when I interviewed for the position, I told my boss that, that wasn't going to happen. I would be very happy to get my certification as an addictions counselor. He thanked me for letting him know. But so for a year, I did this part-time work. I was a coverage therapist for Gateway South, Gateway Greentree, and Gateway North and Cranberry. So if their therapist called off sick or on vacation, I went in and covered a group for a day or a couple of days or a week. And in addition to that, I facilitated an adolescent aftercare program for kids who had completed treatment, but this was a non-billable program. They would come for just a support group, 1 hour a week. And I also taught underage drinking classes at Gateway North Hills and Gateway South. And so I did aftercare and underage drinking in the North Hills on Monday nights. And then on Wednesday night, when I didn't have a group in Gateway South, I would teach underage drinking at Gateway South. In addition to that, they asked me to do some work with Gateway Prevention Services, which was, their headquarters was in Washington, PA. And so I was assigned as a drug and alcohol counselor for the Cannonsburg School District, Cannonsburg Middle School and High School. So 2 days a week. Since groups ran mostly at night, or they ran afternoon and evening, I could be at the school during the day and still do group at night. So I did 2 days a week at the high school and 2 days a week at the middle school. And before I ever set foot in Cannonsburg High School, it was school was starting in September, and they called Gateway Vision was our preventive services, and they called them and said, we need somebody to come down here. One of our kids just was killed in a motorcycle accident, and somebody else committed suicide. And I mean, the day I walked in the door, I'm forming grief groups, and I had two separate grief groups for 2 semesters. It is some of the most rewarding work that I ever did. I had a girl whose grandmother died in a house fire, and she never had anybody to talk to about her feelings about that until she came together in this group. I had another girl whose older brother hung himself in a closet in the room where she was sleeping on the couch, and she woke up and found him, and her parents would not talk about it. It was just like, because they don't know how to deal with it. So it gave an outlet to people like that. And so it was some of the most rewarding work that I ever did. After a year of part-time, the full-time position opened up. I told my boss I couldn't get a master's degree. I didn't plan on getting a master's degree. I did plan on getting my certification. He said, well, thanks for letting me know. He said, I plan on making a decision in about 2 weeks. Well, 2 months later, he had not made a decision about who he was going to hire. And my boss in North Hills said, Sally, you have to change your schedule from Monday night to Tuesday night. Well, Tuesday night was family night at Gateway South. And if I wasn't there to do family night, they were going to have a different therapist every week to cover me when I'm not there. So I went to my boss and I said, if you have somebody in mind that you're going to hire for this position, I hope you'll do it soon, because I'm not going to be able to be here on Tuesday nights. He said, okay, well, thanks for letting me know. Next morning, I got a call from HR. Job is yours. So then I was off and running. How do I know that this is what I was called to? I know, for one thing, I didn't try to be hip Alyssa, who was really I just was me. I'm going to be me, and I'm going to let them be them. And our groups were like open enrollment, and they would be anywhere from 6 or 7 kids to as many as 13, 14, 15 kids in a group. And I just would walk in and I would see a room full of God potential. These were the kids, when I was going to the high school in Cannonsburg, they were labeling these kids as losers, dropouts, never amount to anything. It's like, no, that's not who they are, you know? And so I was able to see them. And what part of my job, what I saw my role as was planting seeds. You know, people would often ask, how successful is your program? They want statistics. How many people stop using after, you know, after one course of treatment? Not very many people stop using. It's usually repeated trips to rehab. And, you know, we know that the 12-step program works. I'm a huge proponent of the 12-step program. And I will tell you, I tried to look up the quote. I couldn't find it, so I'll paraphrase. Richard Rohr says, the 12-step program is the greatest spiritual program that has come to our Western American culture in the 20th century. So that's how much value he places in it. And Abraham Twersky, who was the founder of Gateway Rehab, he worked a 12-step program, and he was not an alcoholic or an addict, but he said every one of us should be working a 12-step program. So I learned a lot from the 12-step program that I have incorporated into my life. So I just saw these kids as they were. And I know that they never felt judged. When they would come into treatment, first of all, they had an evaluation to determine. There was an evaluation therapist who did that end of it. I didn't do it. And then based on criteria, do you meet criteria for treatment, or do you just need an education program kind of thing? So when they would come into treatment, I would read their evaluation, find out their background and what are they using, and what's the family life like. One of the questions on there was, do you believe in God? Of course, we're not allowed to talk about religion in that setting, but the question was on there. And the kids would say, no. And most of the other therapists, when we would get together as adolescent therapists and talk about what was going on, they wouldn't take it any further. But if they said to me, no, I don't believe in God, I'd say, so do you believe there is no God, or you're not sure if there's a God or way? I'm really not sure. I said, great. I said, that's right where you should be. I said, all I'm asking you to do is keep an open mind, and keep questioning, and keep seeking, and don't close the door on it. So, and when I was also one of the only adolescent therapists that would bring this topic up in group. And I couldn't talk about religion, but we talked about spirituality. Where's your spirit? The energy that you can feel right within you. And so the kids would eat this up, and other therapists were afraid to talk about it. So I knew that that was something that was really important to them. Another part of the program that I absolutely loved was family night. So family night, you know, the parents come and we do group that family therapy. And the clientele that we worked with at Gateway South was largely upper middle class, Upper St. Clair, Bethel Park, Peters Township. Then we had a few from the outliers, Canonsburg, Washington. I had kids come to treatment from Wheeling, West Virginia, Waynesburg, Pennsylvania. And then, you know, some people just out in the boonies. And the reason they came to us we were the only treatment program around. They didn't have anything closer to where they lived. But I will tell you, and this became known amongst all our therapists, that dealing with this upper class, well-educated population, they were the hardest people to reach, because they think they know enough to not become addicted. I had a young man in treatment who told me, I have researched on the internet which drugs are safe to use and which aren't, and I know what I'm doing, you know, and that's the mentality. So we had to deal with, well, that's great. Okay, so that's what you know. But let's look at, why are you here? What happened that got you here? And then we had them looking at consequences. And for a lot of them, they just came to rehab to do their time. They were mandated by the school or the magistrate. Very few at that age come in voluntarily. So they would come in and they're just doing their time. Their goal is to get clean long enough to get out of here and go back to do what I'm doing and learn how to avoid the consequences. And so it's like, okay, we'll see how well that works for you. And then you see them coming back. The parents, a lot of the parents were just as difficult to reach. And I would have parents coming in on family like this. I don't know why I'm here. This is my kid's problem. It's not my problem. And then I was able to say, I know how you feel. I was you. I sat in that chair. My husband and I went through this program with our own son when he was 16. And all I can tell you is it helped us. My son is clean and sober. And I'm just asking you to give it a try. And so many times, either at the end of their first session and almost always at the end of their last session, they would come up to me and they would say, Sally, I was so mad about having to come here, but I'm so glad I came. I learned so much. And one thing that I have no question about is that it wasn't me doing it. It was God in me that was spreading the message that they needed to hear. And so I truly, truly love that experience. I had some hard cases. I had my very first, was probably the second day I was working on my own, no longer as an intern. And a young man admitted to treatment. Had a dog collar with spikes on it. He had chains, he had tattoos, and he had safety pins pinned in his arm, like half a dozen safety pins pinned all the way up his arm. And of course, inside I'm going. But I said, oh, welcome, John, welcome to, and then not in front of everybody else, but on the break, I pulled him aside and I said, you know, John, we have some rules here. And I said, unfortunately, I have to ask you not to wear those things to group anymore. Okay. Next day he comes in, pins are gone, collar's gone, chains are gone, hair's not spiked up in purple, it's normal. And he was fine the rest of the way. But I never had to fight with anybody. And I will say we did not have very many Black kids in our group. However, we would get some kids from group homes like the Mel Blount group home. And we had a girls' home in McMurray, and they would be the only Blacks. I think I did have one young man, a Black student from South, where you South Bay. But I never had problems with kids not accepting the Black kids. There was no animosity between Blacks and whites. They all got along and respected each other, and I was grateful for that. And that turned out, and I will tell you that the most thoughtful and considerate kids often were the Black males. So they would be allowed outside on breaks, and occasionally, and the nice weather was really good. We were in Water Dam Plaza, that's where our office was. And in the nice weather, I'd walk them over to Dairy Queen and treat them to Dairy Queen on the break. It was always the Black kids that would hold the door for me. They always called me Miss Sally, you know, they were just the sweetest, dearest kids. And so so you never know the impact that you have. Gateway every year had a gala, a fundraising dinner, and they always asked one of their former adult patients to come and share his recovery experience, and they always wanted an adolescent patient. Well, they took one of my adolescent patients to be the speaker at the gala dinner. And I had kept in touch with him for a long time after graduation. He finally was married with kids and moved to Florida, and I lost touch with him. But you just, you know, you don't know the impact that you have on people.
I've always heard that to recover from addiction or things like that, you have to want to change. It can't be forced.
For intellects, yes.
So when you have somebody with the pins and the dog, you know, what makes that person want to be different? What happens
That makes them want to, I mean, kids have, I mean, obviously we call it woundedness, you know. We all have our childhood wounds and we express them in different ways. And that's just one way. I don't know what happened in his background that caused him to want to present himself that way, but it was not uncommon. People had tattoos, people had colored hair, you know, they had the big in the earlobes. Yeah. So it's just like, okay, all I can do is accept you for who you are and where you are right now. And what I wanted to do was to help them know that their highest and best self was yet to be discovered within them. And that getting high and getting drunk, no matter how much you think it's helping you, it will keep you from finding the truth of who you are.
what made them accept that? What made them give it a try?
Usually, multiple times in treatment, going to jail, what have you. I mean, like I said, I'm
Hitting
planting
bottom.
seeds, hitting bottom, and everybody gets to choose their bottom. Some people will let their bottom go a lot lower than other people. I mean, we were fortunate. We got Kerry into treatment early, and he did not progress. He wasn't done using, by the way, when he left treatment, you know, and he told us later some of the stuff that, but so the night he got out of treatment and another time that week he used, but his conscience bothered him. Because the thing that mattered him the most was his relationship with us. And he didn't like lying to us. So then a little bit later, we didn't let him get his driver's license till he had at least a year clean. So one night he was going out with friends and he came home early at 10 o'clock. And he wasn't driving, his friends were driving. What are you doing home? Well, remember a couple weeks ago when I said I was going to the movies with my friends? Yeah. Well, he said, we never made it to the movies. He said, we wound up at some park. I don't know where it was, probably Mingo Park. Some park, not sure where he was. Everybody's sitting around a circle and they're passing a joint around. And it came to me, I said, no, thanks, I don't do that anymore. And they passed it again. No, thanks, I don't do that anymore. They passed it around. Oh, what the heck? And I took a hit. And he felt really guilty. So this is now 2 weeks later. He's with the same friends. They're going to the movies. And he said, they're not going to the movies. So they were at McDonald's. He said, drop me off at home before you go. Because he knew what they were going to do. He knew he might not be able to avoid the temptation. So he chose not to put himself in that situation. Several years later, out of high school, he did not go to college right away. And he was working as a prep cook at the Goodwood Grill in Bridgeville. And he came to us and he said, I got to tell you guys something. And we always thought, okay. So he was working at the Goodwood Grill and he got some weed from somebody at work. And he smoked the weed and he had really bad hallucinations. And I said, boy, Kerry, that must have been really scary. He said, yeah, it was. He said, but that's not what really scared me. He said, I had these really bad hallucinations. And my next thought was, I'll get rid of that stuff. Maybe I can get some more tomorrow. I said, that's called preoccupation, Kerry. He goes, I know, Mom. I learned something in rehab, and that's what really scared me. And then he's been done with weed since then. So we're planting seeds, but it's going to take, and everybody chooses their bottom. I had 2 cases I'll tell you about. A young man, his drug of choice was alcohol. He was with me as an adolescent. I forget how many years later he came back in. He had relapsed into alcohol use. He was in the adult program, but they would always stop and see me. And every time you have a month clean, 3 months, 6 months, a year, and then every year after that, you get a key tag in AA. Every time he hit a milestone, he came and brought me his key tag to thank me. So you just don't know the impact that you have. I had another young man, a little bit sadder story, who, when he was with me, his drug of choice was alcohol and marijuana. He left, finished the program. He grew up to be a heroin addict. And he actually had a year clean from heroin when he got caught with a DUI and brought him back into the adult program. And he would always stop by my office to say hi and let me know how he's doing. And this one Friday, he came in and he was so upset. His therapist accused him of using, and she wanted him to do a surprise drug screen. And he said, would you monitor my screen? I can't talk to her, Sure. And I got him calmed down and I said, if you didn't use, your screen's going to come up negative, you're good, Took his screen. We didn't have the results yet. Go in Monday morning, we got a call from his mother. She found him dead in his bed on Sunday morning. He had used heroin for the first time in over a year, and this happens a lot. So when you're using, you develop a high tolerance. And when you have a year clean, your tolerance drops again. And if you're using at the level that you used when you quit, it's an overdose. And so he passed away. And myself and my boss and the woman who was the therapist in the adult program that he was currently enrolled in, we went to the funeral home. And I'm walking in with my boss, was Allison Bryant, that's been here. And I said to Allison, I don't even know if his mom's going to know me. been almost 10 years since he was in treatment with me, We walked into the funeral. She threw her arms around me. She said, I'm so glad you came. She said, I had your number on speed dial when he was in with you. And she was just so appreciative that, I went to visit her under those circumstances. He was a great kid. So, so for me, it's, I have these things that I've learned from the 12-step program. First of all, awareness is the first step towards change. We have to be aware of, things aren't going the way we want them to go, and I don't like who I am in this current state of being, and so I need to make a change. I don't know how to do it. Next step is surrender. God, I can't do this. I don't know how to do this. And one of my favorite people that I listen to online, he teaches on A Course in Miracles, and he goes, when we say, God, I don't know, what are we doing? I'm emptying myself and opening myself to receive. God, I don't know, but I know that you know. Please tell me what it is I need to know. And then you still got to take the courage to act on the guidance that you're given. And a lot of times that's so this relates to the 12 steps. My experience in the Insight seminars was equivalent to the 4th step of the 12 steps. Do a searching and fearless moral inventory. You gotta look, Brian's sermon this morning, you gotta acknowledge your strong points and your weaknesses. Our weaknesses should not be something that we're ashamed of, just something that we recognize needs to be healed. And we don't do it. God does it. So we have to open ourselves to allowing God to do that in us and for us. So, trust is trust. So when I say I'm surrendering to you, God, and I don't know, but I know that you do. That's what trust is. And trust is, for me, a little different than believing. Believing is, I believe this to be true, even though it can't be proven. But trust is, I know. It's a sense of knowing that I've had several times over the course of my life that I cannot explain in human language. It's something deep inside. It's a knowing that has never changed. So my beliefs can change. My beliefs can change over time. My knowing has never changed. And so that was gratitude. So when I say, you know what, God, I need your help. I can't do this. I'm putting this in your hands. I know that you know, and I know that you'll help me know what I need to know. And then gratitude. Thank you, God, for answering my prayer before it's ever been answered. Thank you, God. I know my prayer's answered. Gratitude. And then comes the hardest part, patience. Because God doesn't always answer in the way we want or in the time that we want. And so it's hard to maintain the trust then when we feel like we're not being answered right away. So patience is one of my huge lessons, and then receiving and accepting. So those are the steps that I take, that I learned in the 12-step program. I have, those of you who know me, I said a couple weeks ago in adult ed, I could have been a cloistered nun or a monk in a former life, because I take to meditation and contemplation like a fish to water. So, and it has really helped me in times of distress. So my dad passed away on May 27th of 2020. And exactly a year later, May 27th, 2021, I went for a routine mammogram. And they said, oh, can you stay for another, doctor wants to take another picture of the right side. Okay. The doctor he's something suspicious, he wants to take a sonogram. Okay. Yeah, the sonogram showing the same thing as the mammogram. Can you stay for a biopsy? Now, meanwhile, the mind is racing and it's like, oh my God, what's this mean? But I was glad that I was able to do all of that. I was there 3.5 hours for what was supposed to be my routine mammogram. And, but I was glad that he was able to do the biopsy, and I didn't have to wait for an appointment, because that would just been more time to worry. It was 2 days between the date of my biopsy and the date I got the results. And in that time, I went into meditation. And I said, okay, God, here I am. I said, I don't know what lies ahead. And I know that you're with me. I know you will give me whatever I need to live in this time and in this state of unknowing. And I knew I am not going to live in this body forever. This is a vehicle that I use in this lifetime. And if this is meant to be something that leads to the end of my mortal life, I'm okay with that, because I know I don't die. I just go on to live in another higher dimension. So by the time I got the diagnosis, I was at peace, total peace with whatever is, whatever comes, whatever it will be. God is with me, and God will get me through whatever I need to do. And so, and I know too, what I love about the 12-step program, the recovery program, we don't do this alone. And, you know, we Americans pride ourselves on our independence and our self-made man, and, you know, and we're not always the best at learning how to reach out for help. But that's what God wants us to do. He gave us each other. He gave us each other. And so, you know, have somebody you can talk. Maybe it's one person you can find in. And in the 12-step program, they have a group. There are people who join the 12-step program as agnostics and atheists. And the way that they make that program work for them when they're seeking a higher power, they use the power of the group. The group is going to help me learn what I need to learn. Just they're going to call me on my stuff when they see me going down the wrong path. They're going to give me all the support I need in getting clean and staying clean. And so that's how God works. God works through all of us. And so I think that's all I got. We got 10 minutes left now. I would like other people to share. Go ahead.
I have a question, and you kind of answered it, but when you were doing therapy sessions and you were doing the group sessions, what did you do when you walked out the door to go home? What did you do? Did you have a switch to turn on, or what did you do?
So,
You should ask.
no, yeah. So the longer I worked there, it used to be, so our groups ran, we had two programs. The intensive outpatient program ran from 6 to 9 p.m. The partial hospitalization program ran from 3 to 9 p.m. And they would have a dinner break in there. And so I hardly got a break, because in between times I have to do insurance calls. I'm taking calls from parents. I'm taking calls from their private therapist, and, you know, and so it used to be, I would go home at 9, I'd get home at 9:30. Glenn would wait up for me because it was past his bedtime, but he'd wait up for me. I'd get home at 9:30 and he would go to bed and I'd stay up for a little while. Well, then they took all the charting and put it on the computer. We used to do our charting by hand. And when they put the charting on the computer, the mandate came down from the powers that be that you have to do all your charting before you go home. So it's 9 o'clock and I'm doing charting. I'm getting home at midnight. And, you know, as late as 1 p.m., not rarely that late, but almost a lot of times getting home at midnight. And I couldn't go right to bed. I had to, you know, I'm going to bed at 2 o'clock. And we had group evenings, Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. Wednesday and Friday, I was supposed to be in there at 8:30. My boss let me come in at 9 because I didn't get home till midnight. I didn't go to bed till 2, and then I got to be there at 9 the next morning. So it was tough. It was tough. But I was very well aware of what my role was and what it wasn't. I wasn't there to fix. I love Richard Rohr's reading this morning. It's not about fixing anything. We're not broken. We don't need fixed. We're wounded. We need healed. And I was very clear that for the majority of people coming into treatment, one time isn't going to do it. You know, they're going to have more negative consequences. But if we teach them what to look out for, then they can see, like my son did, then they know what to look out for. So, yeah. I hope other people will share how you have experienced God showing up in your life. Because he doesn't just show up in mine. I know he shows up in everybody's life. And it helps when we share that, because then we know we're not in this alone. And, you know. Thoughts? Yes.
I'd like to thank you for what you've done. Most of you know what my first career was I was a police officer here. And quite a few referrals went to Gateway and other agencies. We had a diversion program, especially for the kids. So if they went through the program, everything would be wiped out. The police actions that had to be done. And it meant a lot to me. And that's when I went to my boss to speak at the time. And I said, we got to do something else differently here. On top of that, to the next level. And I pushed the education part of it. And a few of you know that my last 6 years in the police department, I was the education officer assigned to schools. And a real touching, or two things. When I worked midnight, the dreaded phone call we would got from dispatch, call another police department notification. And to sit down with a parent and tell them that their son or daughter's not coming home was the hardest thing I ever had to do in my life in police work. Another real quick incident, one of the group, I did all the different types of groups in the schools for the presentations. And you say about God, something touched me. I had this girl sitting right smack in front of me, and there was something I could just sense. And she would just nod her head. It was just like going, and it was 4 months later, she died at Penn State from the alcohol. And I had a sense that something and I went to that funeral too, and talked to the parents. But one of the great successes, I had retired and my wife and I went out to dinner. We were down at Applebee's one night on a Friday night. The table was across from us with a family of 5 there. And they kept looking over at our table. My wife is still over at Jefferson Middle School now, teaching with special ed. And she says, they're not one of my kids. They have to be one of yours. Why is 5,000 of them? Well, we're still eating and they finished up their dinner. They came over and the daughter said, Officer Reamer. I says, yes. They said, I retired a few weeks ago. She said, no, you're still Officer Reamer to us. And I wanted to say something to you. I know you thought sometimes we weren't listening to you, but we really did. And we actually talked about you at lunchtime and some of the things that you were saying. And I just want to say thank you. And she said she was leaving for Carnegie Mellon in the fall. And she said, thank you again for everything you've done. And so we all make inroads into these kids' lives. And in many different ways, God calls us to be here. And every one of us, no matter what our occupation is here.
Our calling isn't always about our occupation.
No, it's not, but it's interesting how it works through it sometimes.
Yeah. And for me, and I hear it from you, it's like, I was really blessed that it did turn into an occupation, but that's not for everybody. And your sermon this morning, don't judge yourself against other people. You're not anybody else.
So, at the high school where before I retired, we had a young drama teacher who we referred to his classroom as the island of misfit toys. Every loser at the high school lived there. And the kids on weekends, when the plays were there, some of the kids, he was their dad. And there was a point where a lot of people at the higher level of the school district wanted to let him go because of the kids.
They didn't like seeing.
They didn't like see, because he would have kids do video projects and visitors would come and see kids with piercings and get pink hair. And finally, we talked them into not letting him go because the superintendent would have been nailed for dropout rates being excessive. We finally convinced the board that they weren't dropping out because of this one guy. But it was just totally lack of judgment. I mean, I loved it. It was fun. We had a good time. You know, because these kids were rebels and,
Yeah,
but just watching one person take dozens of kids under his wing. He was like 22, 23 years old and he got it
mhm.
right
Yeah.
away. And it just,
Being able to accept them for who they are and where they are in this moment in time is powerful.
and love them.
Exactly.
That was the.
Well, that's the other thing, you know,
And finding something they were good at.
yeah, we, of course, we were in the era where you're not allowed to touch anybody and certainly don't give them a hug. But I would never hug them in a room when I was alone with them. But if their parents were there, can I give you a hug? Oh, and they wanted a hug, you know, or if a bunch of kids were around and somebody just broke down and shared something. Can I give you a hug? Yes, but I had lots of witnesses that I wasn't doing anything inappropriate. I wasn't supposed to do that. They needed it and I did it. Yeah, Yeah.
That's hard.
yeah. So, anybody else share anything? Well, guess what? Well, I didn't know if I was going to fill an hour or run over, but it's.